Hi, welcome to Knit1HeartToo
tutorial.
Yes,
And we're going to talk today about darning socks.
because we all knit socks. Well, no, let me rephrase that.
Of
Any of
knit
us
socks.
who knit the socks have put a lot of effort into it and really get upset when we find a hole, a weak spot, or anything like that. And we're going to try and help you save those socks from...
Yes. And I'll tell you, no matter how you store your socks, it is really hard to avoid the stray carpet beetle or moth that gets in there every once in a while. And then just the wear and tear of the sock on your shoe.
Or, you pick up a nail somewhere and you just snag it on a corner or whatever. Or you have boys like mine who wear through them really quickly because they're hard on their socks.
Yeah.
So we're going to show you right now the tools of the trade for darning socks.
Yes. Contrary to popular belief, you do not need to have an official darning egg.
Wendy has an official darning egg, but it was passed.
It was passed down in my family. This is my darning bag. And what I keep in it is a darning egg. This is an heirloom. It's been handed down for generations. This is an enameled wood egg.
You can see that it's been used quite a bit.
Yes, you can see the scratching from all the needles that have passed over it. And this is a sterling silver handle, and my mother wasn't using it because I darn all of my mom's socks. But this is my darning egg. That being said, there are a lot of other things you could use for a darning egg if you don't have a family heirloom.
So this is my darning egg, and honestly, it's to be desired. But this I made. I went to the local box store, and I got a round wooden ball, and I got a dug-in dowel, and I glued them together with maybe monster glue. I wish this was a little bit longer, but there are other options. So this is my darning egg. You can also find bigger balls, different shape balls. You probably can find something more of an egg shape.
Probably find that egg shape. I know Michael's has wooden things.
I think that's
like
where
this.
I got it.
And you can, instead of putting this fancy bottom on it like Sheila has, you could just put a half-inch dowel in there too to have more of a stick-like bottom. So that works great.
That works great. And then I went looking around the house just for various things. You can use a rubber ball, a small rubber ball. My kids have one somewhere. I have no idea.
This size or a little bigger.
I found a petty egg.
I know we all have those at home. I have two.
You could use this because, it's covered so it doesn't have the rough edges. You can just use this and you got your darning.
You just want to get a rounded surface on there.
Smooth surface. And then I found this. This is a Mario mushroom.
But would make a great darning tool.
It's got some candy in it, but it would make a good, because it's a round surface.
Another thing that you probably have around the house is an old school light bulb.
Which I don't have around. Oh, I have one.
We have one in the lamp.
We have one in the lamp. We tend to use compact
You could use a plastic Christmas bulb. You could use a plastic egg. Easter is coming up as we film this.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
Oh.
Easter is coming up as we film this. You could use a plastic egg from a craft store. And pretty much anything that's going to give you a curved shape inside your sock that will fit into the leg of the sock will be great for a darning egg.
The only thing with the light bulb is don't push or squeeze too hard, and don't forget that it's in there and possibly sit on it because you can break it.
Yeah.
So just be careful if you happen to
use
anything
glass. Be careful.
Otherwise, really, the sky's the limits when it comes to darning. Something round,
or
a rubber
oval,
ball, a stuff.
or egg shape.
Exactly. Just something, with a curve to it.
You want to make sure whatever work you do on the heel has a little give to it that can fit around a curve. And also, it makes it a lot easier to see your work if you can stretch it over a rounded surface because feet aren't flat.
No. So some of the other tools of the trade.
I'll tell you what I have in my little bag.
I don't have a specific bag.
I have a little bag. I do a lot of darning. And as you know, I keep this in it. And I also keep a spool of cotton thread. You could use nylon thread. I use cotton. And that might be poly thread. I just use thread. It's white thread. I use white because I can see it on most sock yarns. A pair of scissors. And I have a tin with a sewing needle in it. people different on their choices. I prefer to use a sewing needle with a sharp point, but a very big eye so that sock yarn can go through it. And that's basically it for my sock darning toolkit.
And here's just a regular darning,
Yarn darning
weaving,
needle.
weaving in. So what I've used for this tutorial and will be using is double pointed needles. I do own some. As you can tell, I'm a very tight knitter because these are warped. And I have 2 metal ones because I've lost the other ones, but the other one's already repurposed right now. This, you're going to need some scissors to cut your yarn. Any type of scissors. I'm using the puppy snips.
Little tiny scissors.
And you're going to need scraps of yarn in either the same color yarn that your socks are or contrasting yarn with possibly nylon in it.
Yes,
and we all have a little bag of scraps.
One thing we were going to say is a lot of the socks that we love, we knit at the beginning before we knew how good it was to have a nylon blend in there for wear. And using a nylon blend to darn the sock, even if it doesn't match, might make your darns last a lot longer than they would if you went ahead and used the same yarn.
Yes.
Depends on how picky you are about how they look. Most of the time the darn is going to be inside your shoe, so go have fun with it.
9 times out of 10. And so enjoy the tutorials.
So I'm going to show you how to begin doing a woven darn. I have my sock here with the hole, and my darning egg is underneath the hole, giving it a curved shape, like as if a foot was in it. And I have a thread and needle, and I'm just doing a basting stitch in and out around the parts of the sock that are not worn. And this will just help hold the hole together when you begin your woven darn. And then I usually just leave the ends hang like that, and I'm all set to start darning. So now I'm going to start beginning the weave, and I have a length of matching yarn. You don't have to use matching yarn, I just happen to have some left over on my needle. And I like to use a regular sewing needle with a big eye because sometimes you need the extra point to help you. And I'm working from, this is the outside of my sock, so I'm working on the outside. And I'm going to start in the middle underneath the yarn. I'm sticking my needle underneath that yarn. And I'm just going to leave a little tail here. And I'm going to go up to the top of it and run, there we go, outside of the yarn through one of the stitches like that. Fairly close together. And then I'm going to run down underneath the yarn's here, through one of the stitches like that. And I'm going to continue doing that, working to make them close together. And it's okay if they're too close, doesn't matter, until I have a few stitches that are lined up. And I'm going to end, by running my needle underneath all of these stitches and coming up behind the yarn next to the first one to do the other side of the hole. So again, I'm going to go down below where I've put my running stitch, and I'm going to go through 2 stitches. This way I'm picking up, I'm on the wrong side of that. I'm picking up through the yarn part of the sock that's still good to make my my new weaving edges. And I'll just knit through again, sew through again, and do, I think, a couple more. Make sure that you're picking up on the outside of your running stitch. And I will leave my yarn running stitch in underneath the darn. I think it just helps give extra support. Alright, so now I'll start doing my weave. And what I do is, it's just like weaving. You go over the first one, under the next one, over the first one, under the next one, over the next one, under, over, under, over, under, all the way through your last one. Pull it up. And anchor it through one of the good stitches on the other side of your running stitch. And you do that, the next one, you make sure you do the opposite. So over, under, over, under, over. As using the other stitch as a guide. Oops, what's happening here? There we go. And you'll see you're beginning to make woven cloth, and at the end of each row, make sure to anchor it through the good stitches on the other side of your needle. Do them as close together as you can. Continue in this fashion, and eventually you will end up with a patch that looks like this. This is a patch that I did on my sock. It's been worn. I actually did it the wrong way so that the edge was on the outside. I prefer to do it so the edge is hidden on the inside of the sock. And here is another example of a more recent darn but hasn't been worn yet. And that's how you do woven darn.
Okay, I'm going to show you another method of darning. It's actually patch darning, where you'll see this is a fairly large, well, it's not really a large hole, but it's a hole. You can either do this by duplicate stitching or by patch. I mean, you could do this darning as well. But what I'm going to do is patch stitching, and you can see that the thread got worn out here. And these are my son's socks, and he wears them hard. So what you're going to do is you want to pick up stitches well below. You're going to need a set of double pointed needles, or I did actually do this magic loop style, which I'll show you. You want to pick up stitches that are fairly below the hole, and you want to pick them up using one leg of the stitch. Always, so right now I'm picking up the right leg of the stitch. Make sure you're always picking up the same leg of each stitch across in as much of a straight row as you can. I'm going to bring that up closer. Hopefully it's not getting too blurry. And as I'm looking, I just want to make sure that the stitches you pick up are indeed strong enough. Because what I'm going to do is I'm picking up these stitches and then I'm going to knit onto them. So I pick up stitches across the bottom of the foot. And I'm looking up to make sure that this is going to be a little different because it's a heel. I mean, as you can see, it decreases. So I'm probably going to have to do it a little bit differently, but if you're doing a patch down here, you're picking up and you're going to basically knit a square. So then with another set pair of my DPNs, I want to look and see where I can pick up on the side. And I want to pick up every other leg of the stitch. Now Alright, I picked up the legs of the stitches, that's the in between the stitches. I tried to pick up every other stitch. I'm going to do the same on this side. And this is going to be a little bit more difficult. Basically, you just want to pick up a good stitch. It may not be evenly across, but as long as you're picking up every stitch, you should be good. And this is going to be more difficult because it's on the heel turn, as you can see, of the sock. This may be more suited for Wendy's weaving, but I got so ambitious that I pretty much darned all my socks except for this one. So I'm just picking up where I think a good stitch will be, a nice secure stitch, and you want to do it every other, and you want to make sure you have the same amount of stitches on each needle, because what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be knitting back and forth on this needle, and I'm going to be knitting the two stitches, this stitch and this stitch together. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm going to pick up one more here. I'd rather have more stitches than less. And then I'm going to knit a patch. And I'm going to show you how that starts. Okay, so here I am. I have some scrap yarn. It's almost the same color. This has nylon in it, and I believe this sock was not made with nylon. I think it was 100%. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to knit on, if I can get the loop on, to this needle. Now this is how I secure my new yarn. I'm not sure what everyone else does, but you'll take care of that end by weaving it in as you would normally weave in ends. And then this is a little fiddly, and I'm knitting this through the back loop mainly because I think I picked up the right leg of the stitch. If you pick up the left, you probably wouldn't have to do that. And then I'm just going to knit on, and be aware it's a little fiddly. I'm sorry if anyone's getting sick with this. And you know, you don't want to pull too tight because then you break another stitch. That's why you need to really, and I think the needle I'm using is too big. That's a size 2 needle. Make sure you have all the right size DPNs. And these are bamboo, which doesn't help either. I don't use bamboo. So here are the first row of stitches. Whoops. See, I almost did what I shouldn't have done. So take this here. I'm bringing this back, and I'm going to knit these two stitches together. I prefer to knit them through the back loop, just because it gives it a tighter knit. So I'm knitting from this needle and this needle together, like that. If anyone is familiar with doing a toe-up sock with a heel, you're basically doing a slip stitch heel. And I'm going to pause right now and change my needle. Okay, so here I turned the sock around. This is the purl side. I'm going to pick up my one size needle. I have my correct needle. I'm going to slip this stitch and just purl back. And it's going slow because I'm in an awkward position with the camera, but it's really a very quick way of doing it. Okay, so now I'm getting to the end of the purl row, and here's my last stitch. I'm going to slip that on, put this through here so that I can weave it in later. And I'm going to purl these two together. Make sure I got every piece of yarn that I need. Purl these two together, and you're done with one row. And I'm sorry, I'm hitting that. So that's the start of my patch. You want to just make sure your stitches are firm. Now on here you can do several different options. You can either do the slip stitch heel that you would do on a normal heel flap or an iron partridge, but do realize that when you do either of those you are going to pull in the sock a little. It shouldn't make that much of a difference with wearing it in the sense of how it feels, but you want to make sure your stitches are secure when you knit them together. Like, you don't want to use any weak stitches because you'll be darning it a week later. Here is a sock that I've been using, and I've done it magic loop style. So my heel stitch, yeah, I guess you can say your heel stitches, but the stitches that are up along the edge are right here, like you were to slip stitch a heel flap. So here is my last stitch, and I've probably twisted it a little bit, and I'm going to take the two, and of course I need to have the yarn in front, there we go. Take the two, and I'm going to knit the two together, and you're done. I have one more row left. I'm going to show you. Oh, and I just dropped my needle. That's one good thing about this in the magic loop area is, you know, you're not worrying about 3 needles. And again, this is the reason why I like magic loop. So I'm going to slip this first stitch. Now on this one, I've been trying to do the eye of partridge heel, and in all honesty, I think I did this the other night, so I can't tell if that's a slip. So I'm going to knit, slip, until I get to the last stitch. It's kind of hard to show you. I'm trying to do it fast, and I probably shouldn't be. So I'm just doing the eye of partridge heel across. This is a sock that had a bit of a bigger patch. And get to the last stitch, I'm going to slip them both together. I'm going to knit through the back loop, and I'm going to turn. And I'm going to stop there so that I can finish and show you how I do the end. So what I did is I picked up stitches along the top, and I'm picking up the left leg of the stitch just because I want to see the difference. And I picked up as many stitches as I have on the needle, because what I'm going to do at this time is take my handy dandy scissors, cut my yarn, and thread it through a needle. And I'm going to do basically the Kitchener stitch to close up this loop here, or to graft the two ends.
Because right now it's a pocket.
It is. It's a pocket, and I'm going to show you what I've done so far. This I did, like I said, the eye of partridge heel, and that's going to wear really well, but if you can see, it does put a little stress on these stitches over here. So you do really want to make sure that you have a good, secure side stitches over here. This one maybe not so much. Ooh, we have to go over that one. So, but here's your pocket, and here's my hole, which you can't see. I did a big pocket, I will admit to that one. So I'm going to slide my needle back. Now I'm going to start the Kitchener different because of where I ended up. I am on a size 1 needle, by the way. I chose to do a smaller needle than I would typically knit with because I don't want to be doing this again. So where my thread is already here, I am just going to, and I'm cheating and looking at my Kitchener stitch messages, I'm going to knit through the back, or weave in like I'm knitting through the back. You're going to leave it on the stitch, on the needle. I'm going to knit through the front and take this off and purl, just like you would do a Kitchener. I'm going to purl through the back and take it off and knit, or weave it in like it knits. And this is a little tough because it's a little tight. And you want to make sure that you pull tight, not too tight, but tight so that, you know, it's firm and secure. And I'll be back when I'm halfway through.
Yeah,
Okay, so here I am halfway through with my Kitchener, and here you can see that I'm basically just grafting this little pocket, and it's coming out really good. Now you're not going to see much because it is the same yarn. I happen to have some left over. So I'm going to finish this off, and I'll show you the finished product with some other examples of it. Okay, so I finished this and I wanted to show you. So this is my finished patch. It's a fairly large patch. Honestly, what was underneath here was some darning, and I blew through the darning, so I just wanted to really secure it. This is my foot, my ball of my foot. That's where I wear mine out. So that's the eye of partridge heel. Here is another patch with the slip stitch heel. And the reason I used a contrasting color was two reasons: so that you could see it, and the contrasting color actually has nylon in it. The main color does not. So that was a patch with slip stitch heel. That's knit one, slip one, knit one, slip one. And this is a patch with just knitting and purling back and forth. I screwed up a little bit over here, but I just wanted to show you the different patches that can happen. And it's a little cushiony on the bottom. I did this on the outside so that you are not going to feel the bumps, and you shouldn't really feel how on your heel or anything. So it should be good. So that's the patch method.
All right, now I'm going to show you how to duplicate stitch over a weakened spot. And you can see I have an actual hole right here. But if you look up here, for example, these stitches are very thinned out from wear. And if you look at your socks every time you wash them, you should just take a quick minute to inspect and look for places like this where the wear has thinned out the yarn, and you can actually duplicate stitch over that yarn to reinforce it before the hole begins, so that you can avoid doing a larger patch like this woven patch, which I've recently put in this sock. So there are two ways that I do duplicate stitch. The first way is almost like embroidering a chain. You can see I've done a little bit of it here, and the way that it works is I like to use a sharp needle with a big eye, so it's like a yarn needle, but it has a sharp sewing point. You go in picking up underneath one of the bars of a stitch like that. Make sure the yarn is looped around, and what you get looks like a little knitting stitch.
Isn't that a daisy stitch, I think they call it?
It may be called a daisy chain. It's a chain stitch is what I've learned it. So I go to the next one, I pick up and make another loop, and continue in that way, going through the loop that I just made, back through, and picking up through the next chain like that. And I'm just basically sewing an extra layer of yarn over the weakened spot. The second way I do duplicate stitch is you can actually follow the original stitches that you made with your yarn. So going underneath the two above and then coming underneath the two below and making a stitch exactly the way the original yarn is in the sock. It's a little hard on this because it is very damaged. And in that way, you are just basically putting a new stitch of yarn through the old stitches. And you would continue that on all of the weakened section of your sock. Just continuing across back and forth until you have covered up with new stitches the parts that are weak. I prefer doing a chain stitch. If you do a chain stitch, do several rows of it, and then I like to run my needle underneath through the stitches back and forth a couple of times just to pull everything together underneath with a few strings. So that is an example of working the darn, and here is an example of what it looks like when you've done it. Here is the same pair of socks, and this is all duplicate stitched to reinforce the heel, and you can see a little bit in here where it's pulled out again. This is an older darn. I've darned these socks several times, and that's the woven darn that I did in conjunction with the reinforcing. And you really can't notice the reinforcing much at all because it does tend to blend in with the work that's already been knit. So the last thing I want to show you is just a simple darn when you find a tiny hole. And the hole could be from a snag. You might have dropped a stitch when you were knitting, or you might have had a stitch that you went through only a few of the strands of the yarn instead of the whole thing. And I do these very simply. You can see I've come up with my yarn in the stitch just below the one that is live here, and I'm just going to catch it with my needle. This is where a sharp needle, small needle, really comes in handy. And then I'm going to look up to the stitch here that's still good. You can see where it broke. Right there is the broken one, but above that is still a good stitch, and I'm going to catch that in. And here's the next one that's still good with the broken stitch around it. And then I'm just going to secure it by running my needle through the stitch below on the side. You can see this. And then through the next stitch next to the one that I started in. So I'm really basically just sewing in a circle, and I'm just going to draw it up together. And then I'm going to quickly weave through the edges in a circle, making sure that I'm pulling in all those edges. Oops. And then you see I've drawn it all together. I drew it up in a little, just in a little circle, and I've made sure to catch in all the ends and pull along the side stitches, and then I'll weave this in on the back.
All right, so we had talked about repurposing the sock. I'm going to show you a sock that has been darned several times and beyond repair. So this was, and the reason why I want to repurpose them, it was my first patterned sock. So it means a lot to you, and you've put a lot of effort into it. So this is beyond repair. I actually don't even know how it got to that point. But as you can see, I've darned it. It's 100% wool. It's not even superwash wool. So what I'm going to do, and this may be a little scary, is I'm going to cut my sock. But if it doesn't work out right, throw it in the trash. So let me see where the best way to cut this, because what I want to try and do is I want to cut the bad part off, but I don't necessarily want to cut, I'm just looking, I'm sorry, the whole sock, because I do have some more of this yarn, but I'd like to try and keep as much as I can. So I'm gonna start over here, and believe it or not, even though these are very poor socks, I'm kind of nervous about it. You're cutting your knitting, and it's just nerve-wracking. So here it is. I'm gonna just curve it in a little. You know, the other part is too, is you just feel like it's such a waste to throw. I mean, unfortunately, this is perfect yarn, but without this, it's not good. So I just cut my yarn, my sock. I got a foot. It's gonna go in the trash. Okay, so my sock or cuff or whatever you'd like to call it is been all ripped back. Here's some extra yarn that I was able to save, not very much because of the damage that was done. but I do have more of this yarn. You know, so this is why I'm choosing to repurpose it, is because I do have more of this yarn. If you want to repurpose your yarn, you can just cut back, and you know, all I'm doing is making these into like fingerless mitts. So I'm going to pick up the stitches. You know, this is wool, so this is pretty sticky, and that I believe is a yarn over, so I'm going to pick that up. I don't know. I don't remember how many needles were on this. I'll have to double check how many stitches were on this, because I'm into the pattern part. And if anyone's wondering, this is Monkey Sock by Cookie A that I did several years ago. And so that's picking up the stitches. You just want to pick them up, the live stitches, and then you're gonna knit like you would normally knit. And this is what, I didn't weave in the ends, but this is what it came out to look like. So you can either use it as a wrist warmer or an ankle warmer, because I have some socks that are a little shorter for my taste, and this would keep me warm. So I hope you found the tutorial helpful. If there's any questions, by all means, give us a shout out.
Yeah.
We'll answer whatever we can.
You can PM us on Ravelry.
And you know, if you had a more detail of a question on maybe a procedure, not a procedure, a technique that we did, maybe we can redo it, you know, specifically for that one technique. Happy darning. Knit with Heart.
Knit with Heart. Bye.